Christian Horner's name refuses to leave the headlines, and for good reason. The man who built Red Bull into a Formula One dynasty now finds himself at the center of whispers that could redraw the competitive map of the sport. After nearly 2 decades at the helm, Horner is being linked with a sensational move to Aston Martin. And while at first glance it may sound like wild paddock gossip, the deeper you look, the more the pieces begin to line up in a way that makes you stop and think. Aston Martin has been spending aggressively snapping up talent across the grid, expanding its facilities, and aligning with Honda for the incoming 2026 power unit era. At the same time, Red Bull is preparing to pivot from Honda to Ford, a move that opens a gap in both leadership and technical partnerships. When you follow these threads across the garage doors, suddenly the idea of Horner trading Red Bull red for Aston Martin green doesn't seem quite so far-fetched. What makes this story more than rumor is Horner's track record. Since taking the Red Bull job in 2005, he has not only weathered every storm but steered the team through periods of unmatched dominance. Under his watch, Red Bull has claimed 8 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' championships, an achievement that few in the history of Formula One can rival. He managed Sebastian Vettel through a dynasty of 4 consecutive world titles, then pivoted seamlessly to build the foundation that allowed Max Verstappen to dominate a new era. That kind of leadership portfolio isn't just almost irreplaceable. People inside the paddock understand how rare it is to find someone who knows not just how to win but how to build a winning culture from scratch, which is why a connection between Horner and Aston Martin is not just idle chatter. It feels more like a signal of what Lawrence Stroll, Aston Martin's billionaire owner, envisions for his project: a front office with championship muscle memory, a team culture that already knows what it takes to transform potential into silverware, and a structure ready to explode into relevance when the 2026 regulation reset levels the field. For Aston Martin, this is about more than prestige. This is about timing. Formula One is on the verge of a massive reset, and history shows that when regulations flip the table, the teams with the strongest leadership and clearest vision are the ones that seize the new era. Red Bull did it in 2009, Mercedes did it in 2014. Horner knows that pattern intimately, and Aston Martin's growing infrastructure suggests they are desperate to be the next team to write themselves into that history. Too many inside the sport. This isn't a coincidence. It's the beginning of a story that could redefine the competitive order of Formula One. The Honda connection is where this rumor turns from speculation into strategy. For years, Honda has been the quiet force behind Red Bull's dominance, supplying the power units that propelled Max Verstappen to 3 consecutive championships. But as Red Bull shifts toward Ford for 2026, Honda is moving its engines to Aston Martin. And with that comes a ripple effect across the grid. Engine manufacturers in Formula One aren't just suppliers, they're stakeholders with influence, leverage, and a deep desire to place their own protégés in the right environments. And that's where Yuki Tsunoda enters the picture. Has always been more than a Red Bull junior. He's a Honda project, nurtured and guided by the Japanese manufacturer from his earliest days. With Red Bull's pipeline already crowded, drivers like Issa Kajar are knocking on the door for senior opportunities. Tsunoda's path to a main team seat grows narrower with each race. Helmut Marko, Red Bull's ruthless driver program chief, has never been sentimental about his decisions. He rotates drivers with a cold efficiency, often discarding talent if they fail to deliver instantly. That reality leaves Tsunoda vulnerable, even after showing flashes of speed and maturity in his current seat. Now imagine the landscape shifting in 2026. Red Bull has a new engine partner in Ford. Honda, meanwhile, has fully integrated into Aston Martin. The umbilical cord between Tsunoda and the Red Bull family frays thinner by the day. And if you're Honda, the logic is simple. You look after your own, which means finding Tsunoda a lifeline inside the Aston Martin setup. The rumor making the rounds is that Honda is lobbying for Tsunoda to join Aston Martin, potentially as a test and reserve driver. On the surface, it's not glamorous. It wouldn't guarantee him a race seat. But in Formula One, proximity is power, with staying inside the garage, contributing in cities, and waiting for the right opening can be the difference between survival and irrelevance. Once a driver drops out of the grid, history shows that the path back is brutally steep. Very few make it. This subplot illustrates how tightly intertwined leadership, power units, and driver futures are in Formula One. If Horner joins Aston Martin and Honda flexes its muscle to keep Tsunoda within its orbit, suddenly the outlines of a strategic alliance become clearer. Aston Martin wouldn't just be getting leadership, they'd be acquiring a package, a power unit with Honda's factory focus, a leadership brain with championship pedigree, and potentially a driver pipeline that aligns with the manufacturer's long-term ambitions. In the high-stakes game of Formula One politics, that's how winning projects are built, not in isolation, but by weaving together power, talent, and influence into a structure that can strike when opportunity opens. So what happens if these pieces fall into place? One scenario paints a fascinating picture. Aston Martin, armed with Honda engines, guided by Christian Horner, and carrying a support role for Tsunoda, could transform overnight from a team aiming for podiums to a legitimate championship contender. This isn't just about signing a high name, it's about creating a foundation that is ready to absorb greatness. Consider how teams in Formula One build dynasties. It never starts with a single superstar driver. It starts with leadership, infrastructure, and a culture that doesn't accept excuses. Horner has lived that process before. He knows how to bring together technical groups, how to integrate star drivers into a long-term plan, and how to create accountability at every level of an organization. That's the kind of cultural shift Aston Martin would need to truly break into the sport's elite. Lawrence Stroll, as ambitious as he is, cannot buy trophies. What he can do is hire the kind of leadership that has already proven it knows how to win when the rulebook resets. But of course, the biggest domino in all of this remains Max Verstappen. The paddock has been obsessed for months with speculating about his future. Mercedes was floated, Aston Martin was teased. But the latest signals suggest he'll stay with Red Bull through the 2026 season. That provides stability in the short term, but after that, it's anyone's guess, because in Formula One, loyalty has limits. If Red Bull nails the Ford project and delivers Verstappen a car that lets him keep doing Verstappen things, then the story ends there. But if Ford struggles, if the car falters, or if another team rises as the new reference point, Verstappen will have to reassess. And this is where Aston Martin's potential move for Horner becomes so intriguing. Imagine Verstappen looking across the pit lane in 2027 or 2028. On one side, Red Bull with Ford engines carrying the weight of uncertainty. On the other side, Aston Martin, with Honda power, with a leadership team that includes the man who once guided his career to dominance. If Verstappen ever considers a seismic move, it will only be toward a structure he trusts. And there is no figure he trusts more than Horner. This isn't just about what Aston Martin wants now. It's about preparing a landing spot for the biggest star in Formula One should circumstances shift. That is the long game. And it's why this rumor has paddock insiders whispering that Aston Martin could become the most intriguing destination in the sport when the next era dawns. But let's not forget, none of this happens in a vacuum. Red Bull is not a passenger in its own story. Despite turbulence around leadership, internal controversies, and speculation over Horner's departure, the team continues to operate with ruthless efficiency. Verstappen's camp has been clear. They want three things: a fast car, a competent strategy team, and an organization that lets Max focus on driving. As long as Red Bull delivers those pillars, there's no reason for him to leave. But Formula One is rarely that simple. The arrival of a new power unit era is always a moment of vulnerability. Look back at history. Dominant teams often stumble when regulations change, and it's those stumbles that open the door for rivals to leap ahead. For Red Bull, Ford represents both an opportunity and a risk. Unlike Honda, which has already proven itself as a championship-winning partner, Ford is stepping into uncharted territory in modern Formula One. Success is not guaranteed, and if the partnership doesn't deliver, Red Bull could find itself on the defensive for the first time in over a decade. That's where Aston Martin looms as a threat. Backed by Honda, driven by Stroll's resources, and potentially guided by Horner, they could strike at exactly the moment Red Bull falters. Formula One history tells us that timing is everything. The teams that position themselves correctly before a regulation reset often dictate the next decade of dominance. And beyond the championship stakes, there's the human element. For Tsunoda, the next months could define whether he remains relevant or fades into the long list of talented drivers who never got a second chance. For Aston Martin, it's about more than trophies, it's about legitimacy. They've built hype, they've hired aggressively, they've invested heavily in infrastructure. But none of that matters until they start winning consistently. Hiring Horner wouldn't just be a personnel move, it would be a statement. A declaration to the entire paddock that they aren't satisfied with being contenders, they want to be champions. That's the cultural transformation Horner specializes in. And it's why this rumor refuses to die. In the end, this story might turn out to be nothing more than paddock noise, another rumor that flares up, burns bright for a few weeks, and then vanishes into the ether. But it might also be something far bigger. It might be the beginning of a seismic shift in Formula One's balance of power. Imagine the symbolism. Horner calling strategy in Aston Martin green. Tsunoda grinding away in simulators, waiting for a breakthrough. Verstappen glancing across the pit lane, weighing whether his future lies with Ford or Honda. It would feel like Red Bull's DNA transplanted into a new badge, not a copy, but a new synthesis of the same competitive instincts that built a dynasty. If Aston Martin does move forward with this vision, the stakes are enormous. Culture change isn't a part-time job. It requires hard choices, painful adjustments, and the kind of relentless accountability that only a serial winner like Horner can enforce. Lawrence Stroll must decide. Does he want continuity and incremental gains, or is he ready to hand the keys to someone who will demand nothing less than titles? That choice will define Aston Martin's future. What's certain is that the 2026 reset will redraw the map of Formula One. The teams that get leadership, engine integration, and driver alignment right will dictate the conversation. Everyone else will spend the next decade explaining why they fell short. That's why this rumor matters. Because whether it happens or not, It shines a spotlight on what Aston Martin must become if it truly wants to join the sports elite. So, I'll leave it with you. If these threads tighten, if Horner really does walk away from Red Bull and into Aston Martin's garage, would we be witnessing the birth of Formula One's next dynasty? Or is this just another story that will fade as quickly as it appeared? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the paddock's most electrifying rumor, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more, because in Formula One, today's whispers are often tomorrow's history.